The porch light was too bright that night, casting harsh shadows across my daughter-in-law's face as she stood in the doorway like a sentry, blocking the warmth and laughter spilling out from inside. I was holding a silver picture frame, beautifully wrapped with a cream-colored bow I'd tied myself that afternoon, and my hand had gone completely numb around it. "I'm sorry," Chloe said, and her voice had that terrible quality of practiced politeness, like she'd rehearsed these words. "You're not welcome here." Not anger, not shouting, just cool, clinical detachment that was somehow worse than any tantrum could have been. Behind her, I could see the golden glow of their living room, hear the crystal-clear sound of champagne glasses clinking, the warm burst of laughter from people celebrating my son's 10th wedding anniversary, their 10th wedding anniversary, the same wedding I had helped plan, the same marriage I had supported through every rocky patch, every financial struggle, every sleepless night with their children. I could see David, my David, hovering in the background like a ghost of himself, his shoulders hunched forward in that way he used to stand when he was a little boy and knew he'd done something wrong. But he wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My son, who used to run to me with every scraped knee and broken heart, stood there like a silhouette refusing to acknowledge I existed. I was dressed in my best navy dress, the one I'd bought specifically for their wedding 10 years ago and had saved for special occasions ever since. I'd done my hair at the salon that morning, spent 40 minutes choosing the perfect wrapping paper for their gift. I'd driven 23 minutes across town with my radio turned to their favorite jazz station, practicing what I would say when I handed them the frame I'd chosen so carefully. If you're watching this, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know, have you ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own family's story? Have you ever stood on a doorstep holding love in your hands while the people you die for treat you like an unwelcome solicitor? Because that's what I was in that moment, a solicitor peddling something nobody wanted. Love, tradition, the foolish belief that showing up with good intentions could bridge whatever gap had opened between us. Standing there in that pool of harsh porch light, listening to the sounds of celebration I wasn't invited to share, I felt something crack open inside my chest, not my heart breaking, that would come later. This was something else. This was the sound of denial finally shattering, of willful blindness being forced into the light. Because this wasn't a surprise, was it? This wasn't Chloe having a bad day or David being thoughtless. This was formal notification of something that had been decided long ago. I had been systematically uninvited from their lives, dismissed piece by piece, holiday by holiday, grandchild visit by grandchild visit, until tonight. Their anniversary, the celebration of a marriage I had helped nurture, became the venue for my official eviction notice. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, holding that silver frame while Chloe waited for me to leave. The gift I'd chosen so carefully, meant to hold their favorite wedding photo, suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands. All that love, all that hope, all that desperate desire to be included in their happiness wrapped up in cream-colored paper with a bow I'd tied with arthritic fingers because I wanted it to be perfect. And in that moment, looking at my son's wife blocking the door to their celebration while my own son hid in the shadows behind her, I realized something that would change everything. I had been begging for scraps from a table I had helped set, in a house I had helped them buy, celebrating a marriage I had helped them build. Well, I wasn't begging anymore. What happened next changed everything. Not just that night, but the entire rest of my life. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered why you keep trying so hard for people who seem to wish you would just disappear, then you need to hear what I did when I finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in my own son's life. To understand why that moment on the doorstep felt like a knife to the heart, you need to know what their 10th anniversary meant to me. You need to understand what I had invested in that marriage, what I had sacrificed to help them build the life they were celebrating without me. 10 years ago, I was the one who helped David pick out Chloe's engagement ring. We spent 3 Saturday afternoons going from jeweler to jeweler because my boy was so nervous so determined to get it right. "Mom," he said, gripping my hand in the last shop we visited, "what if she says no? What if I'm not good enough for her?" I squeezed his hand back and told him what every mother tells her son. "David, any woman would be lucky to have you. You're kind, you're hardworking, and you love with your whole heart." I believed that then. I believed it when I spent 6 months helping plan their wedding, believed it when I took out a loan to help pay for the reception they wanted but couldn't afford, believed it when I held David's shaking hands in the church vestibule and told him to breathe, that everything would be perfect. And it was perfect. Their wedding day was absolutely perfect. David looked so handsome in his father's tuxedo, the one I'd had altered to fit him. Chloe was radiant in a dress that cost more than my monthly pension, but I didn't begrudge her a penny. This was my son's happiness we were celebrating. I was the one who caught Chloe's bouquet when she threw it directly to me during the reception. I was the one who danced with David during the mother-son dance, tears streaming down both our faces as he whispered "Thank you for everything, Mom," in my ear. I was the one who stayed until 2 in the morning, helping clean up while the happy couple left for their honeymoon in Italy, a honeymoon I had helped fund with that loan I was still paying off 2 years later. But looking back now, I can see exactly when things started to change. It was subtle at first, so subtle I convinced myself I was imagining it. The phone calls that used to come every Sunday began skipping weeks. When I'd call instead, the conversations felt obligatory, rushed, like I was interrupting something more important. Chloe started making these little comments about my old-fashioned ways. When I'd bring homemade meals during their busy weeks, she'd smile that tight smile and say things like, "Oh, Margaret, you really don't need to go to so much trouble. We're trying to eat healthier now." When I'd offer to help with holiday decorating, something I'd always loved doing, she'd tell me they were simplifying this year. David. My David, who used to call me for advice about everything from job interviews to what tie to wear, stopped asking for my opinion. When I'd offer guidance, he'd get this uncomfortable look and say, "Mom, Chloe and I have it handled," like needing his mother had become something to be embarrassed about. But I pushed those feelings down. I made excuses for every slight, every dismissal, every time I felt like I was being slowly erased from their lives. "They're newlyweds," I told myself. "They need space to build their own traditions." When I wasn't invited to their first anniversary dinner, I convinced myself it was romantic. Just the two of them. I spent 9 years making excuses for their behavior because admitting the truth would have been unbearable. The truth that my daughter-in-law saw me as a burden, an interference, an outdated relic of David's past that needed to be managed and minimized. The truth that my son was willing to let her. But their 10th anniversary? That felt different. That felt significant. 10 years of marriage deserved recognition, celebration. I spent weeks choosing the perfect gift. That silver frame wasn't just any frame. It was handcrafted by a local artisan, engraved with their wedding date, designed to hold their favorite wedding photograph. I had my hair done that morning at the salon, the same place I'd gotten it styled for their wedding. I wore the navy dress I'd worn to their rehearsal dinner, the one David had complimented, saying I looked elegant and timeless. I drove across town with butterflies in my stomach, the same nervous excitement I'd felt driving to their wedding. I was so sure that showing up with love, with a thoughtful gift, with genuine happiness for their milestone would bridge whatever gap had opened between us. I thought love could fix anything if you just offered enough of it, consistently enough, sincerely enough. I was wrong. Love offered to people who don't want it isn't a gift, it's an imposition. And I was about to learn that lesson in the most humiliating way possible. But standing on that doorstep, holding that perfect gift while being told I wasn't welcome at my own son's celebration, something fundamental shifted inside me. The mother who had spent a decade making herself smaller to fit into their lives was about to disappear forever. I don't remember saying goodbye. I don't remember turning around or walking down their front steps. What I remember is suddenly being in my car, sitting in their driveway with the engine running, staring at that silver picture frame on my passenger's seat, like it was evidence of a crime I'd committed against myself. I made a conscious decision in that moment. I turned off the radio. Complete silence. No music, no talk shows, no comforting background noise to soften what had just happened. I needed to sit with the full weight of that rejection, to feel every ounce of it without distraction. And the drive home was 23 minutes of absolute clarity. Every familiar landmark looked different somehow, like I was seeing my own neighborhood through the eyes of a stranger. The grocery store where I'd bought ingredients for countless meals they'd eaten without gratitude. The park where I'd pushed their children on swings during the brief period when I was still considered a youthful grandmother. The flower shop where I'd bought arrangements for every birthday, anniversary, and holiday, desperately trying to buy my way back into their affections. That gift box sat there like a passenger I couldn't get rid of, shifting slightly with every turn, reminding me with its presence of how thoroughly I'd humiliated myself. The cream-colored bow I'd tied so carefully that afternoon was still perfect, still hopeful, still believing it was going to a celebration where it would be welcomed. I wasn't crying, that surprised me. I thought I should be sobbing, heartbroken, devastated. Instead, I felt this strange numbness spreading through my body, starting from that spot on my hand where I'd gripped the frame too tightly and radiating outward until my whole chest felt hollow. When I pulled into my own driveway, I sat there for another 10 minutes just staring at my house, my little house that I'd bought after David's father died. The house I'd made cozy and warm specifically so my son and his family would want to visit. The porch light I always kept on in case they stopped by unexpectedly. The guest room I decorated with Chloe's favorite colors, thinking someday they might want to stay overnight. I walked through my front door and stopped dead in the hallway. Just stopped. Didn't take off my coat, didn't put down my purse, didn't do any of the normal things you do when you come home. I stood perfectly still in my own entryway and let the silence of my house wash over me. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a surprise. This wasn't Chloe having a bad day or David being thoughtless or some terrible misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a phone call. This was confirmation of something I'd been willfully ignoring for years. I had been uninvited from their lives piece by piece, decision by calculated decision. Tonight wasn't the beginning of my exclusion, it was the formal announcement of an eviction that had been in process for years. They had been gradually erasing me from their story, and I had been so desperate to remain relevant that I'd pretended not to notice. Standing in my hallway, still wearing my good dress and my carefully applied lipstick, I finally allowed myself to see what I'd been refusing to acknowledge. Every canceled dinner, every shortened phone call, every time I'd offered help and been told it wasn't needed. It wasn't them being independent. It was them being rid of me. The worst part wasn't the rejection itself. The worst part was realizing how long I'd been rejected without admitting it to myself, how many months, years, I'd spent making excuses for their behavior, convincing myself that if I just tried harder, loved more, gave more, they'd remember how much they needed me. I walked into my living room and sat down in my favorite chair, the one I'd moved closer to the window so I could watch for their car in case they ever decided to visit spontaneously. I looked around at all the family photos I displayed so prominently, the grandchildren's artwork I'd framed like precious treasures, the little mementos from family vacations they'd grudgingly invited me on. And I realized something that would change everything. I had been living in a museum dedicated to a family that no longer wanted me as a member. I had been the curator of my own heartbreak, carefully preserving evidence of relationships that existed only in my imagination. That silver picture frame was still in my car, still wrapped in its hopeful bow. But I wasn't going to try to deliver it again. I wasn't going to call and apologize for showing up uninvited to my own son's celebration. I wasn't going to make excuses for their behavior or mine. For the first time in years, I was going to stop pretending that begging for love from people who didn't want to give it was somehow noble, or admirable, or necessary. I was going to stop being grateful for scraps from a table I had helped them set. What happened next would surprise everyone, including myself. But first, I had some truth-telling to do. And after years of lying to myself about what was really happening in my own family, the truth was going to hurt in ways I never imagined. Sitting in my living room that night, still in my good dress, I did something I'd been avoiding for years. I finally allowed myself to take inventory of what had really been happening. Not the sanitized version I'd been telling myself, but the raw, unvarnished truth about how, systematically, I'd been erased from my own son's life. Let me tell you about the grandchildren first, because that's where the cruelest cuts were made. I have 2 grandchildren, Emma, who's now 12, and little James, who just turned 8. I was present for both their births, held them in the hospital when they were hours old, changed their diapers, sang them lullabies, was their grandmother in every sense of the word. But access to them became a privilege I had to earn rather than a right I possessed. It started with supervised visits, though they never called them that. Suddenly, I couldn't take Emma to the park alone anymore because Chloe likes to be there when Emma's out. I couldn't babysit overnight because the kids sleep better in their own beds. Every interaction with my grandchildren had to be orchestrated, monitored, approved. Then came the scheduling restrictions. This isn't a good week, Margaret. They're so busy with soccer and piano lessons. Maybe next month when things calm down. Next month never came. The children I used to see twice a week became once a week, then every other week, then only on major holidays, and even then, only for a few hours. But here's what really broke my heart. They stopped calling me Grandma. Emma, who used to run to me shouting, "Grandma!" with her arms wide open, started calling me Margaret at age 7. When I asked David about it, he said Chloe thought it was more respectful for children to use adults' proper names. More respectful, as if acknowledging our relationship was somehow disrespectful. And the lies, oh, the lies I told myself about why I wasn't included. When Emma had her first school play, I found out about it 3 days after it happened. "We forgot to mention it," Chloe said with that apologetic smile that never reached her eyes. When James broke his arm and spent 4 hours in the emergency room, no one called me. I learned about it 2 weeks later when I noticed his cast. My grandchildren were growing up without me, and I was supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of access I was granted. 10-minute phone calls where they sounded bored and distracted. Brief appearances at birthday parties where I was treated like a distant relative rather than their grandmother. Photos posted on social media that I had to see secondhand because I wasn't important enough to receive them directly. But the grandchildren were just the beginning. The real poison was how Chloe began rewriting the history of David's childhood. My history, my memories, my life, and getting every meaningful detail wrong while David sat silent. At family gatherings, she'd tell stories about David's childhood as if she'd been there. "Remember how David was so shy as a little boy," she'd say to guests, while I sat 3 feet away knowing that David was never shy. He was cautious, thoughtful, but never shy. "He was such a picky eater," she'd continue, when David ate everything I put in front of him and always asked for seconds. She'd talk about his high school graduation, his college years, his first job, all events she'd never witnessed, with the authority of someone who'd lived them. And David would nod along, never correcting her, never saying, "Actually, Mom would know better since she was there." I became a silent witness to the erasure of my own experiences, my own memories, my own role in raising the man they were all celebrating. When I'd try to add details or correct the record, Chloe would smile that patient smile and say something like, "Well, that's your version," as if objective facts were matters of opinion. My version, as if the woman who lived through David's childhood, who was present for every milestone, who sacrificed to give him every opportunity, somehow had a less reliable perspective than the woman who met him when he was 25. But perhaps the most calculated betrayal was how they used my love against me financially. 3 years ago, David and Chloe needed a place to stay while they saved for a house. "Just temporarily, Mom," David promised. 6 months, maybe 8 at the most. "We'll help with groceries and utilities." 6 months became 2 years. Help with groceries became me cooking dinner every night because Chloe works such long hours. Help with utilities became me paying the increased bills while they saved every penny of their salaries. I became an unpaid live-in cook, housekeeper, and babysitter while they treated my home like a free hotel. And when they finally moved out into their beautiful new house, the down payment for which came from a loan I gave them that we all knew would never be repaid, there was no acknowledgement of what I'd sacrificed. No recognition that without those 2 years of free housing, free childcare, and free meals, they never could have saved enough to buy their dream home. Instead, Chloe would tell people how independent they were, how they'd worked so hard to achieve their goals. My contribution was never mentioned, never acknowledged, never appreciated. I had become a secret they were embarrassed to admit. The financial reality that made their success story less impressive. But the cruelest weapon in Chloe's arsenal was how she reframed my every gesture of love as a character flaw. My concern for their well-being became interference. My desire to help became inability to let go. My traditions became burdens they had to endure rather than gifts they could enjoy. When I'd call to check on them during David's bout with pneumonia, I was hovering. When I'd bring meals during busy weeks, I was treating them like children. When I'd offer advice based on 30 years of life experience they hadn't had yet, I was being controlling. Every instinct that made me a good mother was systematically redefined as evidence that I was a problem to be managed. My love was suffocating, my help was infantilizing, my presence was an imposition. I had been carefully, methodically trained to see my own maternal instincts as flaws that needed correction. And the most devastating part? I believed them. I spent years apologizing for loving too much, for caring too deeply, for wanting to be part of their lives. I made myself smaller and quieter and less demanding, thinking that if I could just perfect the art of loving them the right way, they'd want me around again. But sitting in my living room that night, finally seeing the pattern clearly, I realized something that changed everything. There was no right way to love people who had decided they didn't want your love. The problem was never how I was offering it. The problem was that they didn't want it at all. And once I understood that, everything else became crystal clear. I sat in that chair until nearly midnight, still wearing my good dress, still carrying the weight of that rejection. But something had fundamentally shifted during those hours of brutal honesty. The woman who had driven to that anniversary party hoping to earn her way back into their good graces was gone, replaced by someone I hadn't seen in years, someone who remembered her own worth. I walked to my car and retrieved that silver picture frame, still perfectly wrapped, still hopeful with its cream-colored bow. I brought it inside and set it on my kitchen table, staring at it like it might hold the answers to questions I was just learning how to ask. Then I did something that surprised even me. I unwrapped it. Slowly, carefully, like I was opening a gift meant for me instead of returning one that had been rejected. The silver frame was even more beautiful than I'd remembered. Hand-engraved with their wedding date, designed to showcase their happiness for decades to come. But I wasn't going to spend another moment of my life creating shrines to people who saw me as an obligation. Instead, I walked to my desk and found a photograph that had been sitting in a drawer for months. A picture of myself taken by my friend Helen during our trip to the botanical gardens last spring. In that photo, I'm standing among the rose bushes, laughing at something Helen had said, my face bright with genuine joy. I'm not performing happiness for someone else's camera or trying to look like the perfect grandmother or the supportive mother-in-law. I'm just Margaret, caught in a moment of pure contentment, surrounded by beauty I had chosen to seek out for my own pleasure. I placed that photograph in their anniversary frame and carried it to my mantel, setting it where I could see it every morning when I came downstairs. This beautiful frame, meant to hold their love story, now held mine instead. The story of a woman learning to celebrate herself after years of being told she wasn't worth celebrating. It felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. That frame wasn't a rejected gift anymore. It was a promise to myself, a promise that I would stop offering my love to people who handed it back unopened, stop creating beauty for people who saw it as a burden, stop celebrating people who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge my existence. I had just changed into my nightgown when the phone rang. David's name on the caller ID made my stomach clench. For a moment, I thought he might be calling to apologize, to explain, to invite me back. How pathetic that even after everything, part of me still hoped for rescue from the very people who had pushed me overboard. "Mom," he said, and his voice had that careful tone he used when he was about to ask me to be reasonable about something unreasonable. "You can't just show up unannounced like that. You upset Chloe." I upset Chloe. Not, "I'm sorry we hurt you." Not, "We should have handled that better." Not even, "We didn't mean to exclude you." Just concern for Chloe's feelings, as if mine were irrelevant. "You're absolutely right, David," I said, and I could hear the surprise in his silence. He'd been prepared for tears, for pleading, for the usual maternal guilt that would make him feel bad enough to throw me a few crumbs of attention. "I shouldn't have shown up unannounced. I'm glad you understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice still deadly calm. "I understand that you've made your position very clear, and I want to assure you that you don't have to worry about me showing up unannounced, ever again." There was a pause. "Mom, don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic, David. I'm being respectful of the boundaries you've established. In fact, I won't be showing up at all anymore, announced or unannounced." "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. You and Chloe have made it abundantly clear that my presence in your lives is unwelcome. So, I'm removing it. Permanently." The silence stretched between us, and I could practically hear him trying to figure out how to respond. This wasn't the script we usually followed. Usually, I would apologize for having feelings, promise to try harder, beg for another chance to prove I could love them in a way that didn't inconvenience them. "Mom, you're overreacting. It was just one party." "No, David, it wasn't just one party. It was the final confirmation of something that's been happening for years. You've been gradually removing me from your lives, and tonight you just made it official." "That's not—" "Let me finish," I said, and something in my tone made him go quiet. "For years, I've been making excuses for your behavior, telling myself that you needed space, that you were busy, that your priorities had simply shifted. I convinced myself that if I just loved you better, tried harder, asked for less, you'd remember how much you needed me. But I was wrong. You don't need me. You've made that very clear. And you know what? That's okay. You're adults. You get to choose who you want in your lives. But I get to choose too." "What are you choosing?" "I'm choosing to stop begging for scraps from people who see my love as a burden. I'm choosing to stop apologizing for wanting to be part of my son's life. I'm choosing to stop accepting behavior from you that I wouldn't tolerate from a stranger." David tried several more times to argue, to minimize what had happened, to convince me I was overreacting, but something fundamental had shifted in me during that long night of truth-telling. The mother who had spent years shrinking herself to fit into whatever space they were willing to give her was gone. When I hung up that phone, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was free. Free from the exhausting work of trying to earn love from people who had already decided I wasn't worth loving. Free from the constant anxiety of wondering if I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough. For the first time in years, I had energy for something other than managing their rejection, and I was about to discover what it felt like to invest that energy in people who actually wanted what I had to offer. The morning after that phone call with David, I woke up feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: curiosity about my own life. Not anxiety about whether they needed me, not guilt about something I'd said or done wrong, just genuine excitement about what I might do with a day that belonged entirely to me. I made myself a proper breakfast, not the quick toast I usually grabbed while worrying about their problems, and sat at my kitchen table with the newspaper spread out in front of me. And there, in the community section, was an advertisement that caught my eye. Silver Readers Book Club, New members welcome. Thursdays at 2 p.m. When was the last time I'd read a book for pleasure? When was the last time I'd had a conversation about ideas instead of logistics? I couldn't remember. For years, my free time had been spent on standby, available for whatever crisis or convenience they might need me for. I called the number that morning and spoke to a woman named Dorothy, who had the warmest laugh I'd heard in months. "Oh, we'd love to have you join us," she said. "We're reading The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo this month. It's delicious. Can you make it this Thursday?" Thursday used to be the day I kept free in case Chloe needed help with the children's after-school activities. Now it was going to be my day, my book, my conversation, my choice. The book club was just the beginning. Within 2 weeks, I'd also signed up for a gardening class at the community college, something I'd wanted to do for years but never had time for because I was always available for their emergencies. I joined a walking group that met at the park every morning, started volunteering at the library's literacy program, and rekindled friendships I'd let wither while I focused all my attention on earning approval from people who didn't want to give it. My house began to feel different. Instead of the museum of rejected love it had become, it started feeling like a home again, my home. I rearranged the furniture to suit my preferences instead of keeping everything positioned for visits that never came. I cooked meals I enjoyed instead of practicing recipes I thought they might like. I bought books and plants and threw pillows that made me happy without consulting anyone else's taste. But the most unexpected gift came from a source I never anticipated. 3 weeks after the anniversary incident, my phone rang on a Tuesday evening. When I saw David's number, my stomach clenched. Old habits die hard. But when I answered, it wasn't David's voice I heard. "Grandma Margaret?" The voice was small, uncertain. "It's Lily." Lily. Not Emma. I'd been wrong about my granddaughter's name in my pain. My 12-year-old granddaughter was calling me, and she was using her mother's cell phone because children don't have their own phones, and she was calling me Grandma for the first time in years. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's so good to hear from you." "Grandma, are you okay? Mom and Dad have been fighting a lot, and I heard your name. I was worried about you." The old me would have pumped her for information, would have used this opening to plead my case or badmouth her parents or try to manipulate the situation to my advantage. But I'd learned something important in those weeks of reclaiming my life. Real love doesn't put children in the middle of adult conflicts. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart," I told her. "I'm remembering who I am. Your parents and I had a disagreement, but that has nothing to do with how much I love you." "You sound different," Lily said. "Happier." And she was right. I did sound different because I felt different. For the first time in years, when someone asked how I was doing, the answer was genuinely positive. Not fine, in that forced way you say when you're pretending your heart isn't breaking. Actually, truly fine. We talked for 30 minutes about everything and nothing. She told me about school, about her friends, about the book she was reading for English class. I told her about my book club, about the garden I was planning, about the volunteer work that was giving me such satisfaction. We weren't talking around the elephant in the room. We were having a real conversation between two people who cared about each other. "Can I call you again sometime?" she asked before hanging up. "When things are quieter here?" "Anytime you want, sweetheart, day or night. I'm always here for you." After I hung up, I realized something profound had happened. For the first time since this whole situation started, I had something to offer that came from abundance rather than desperation. I wasn't trying to use my granddaughter to get back at her parents or manipulate my way back into their lives. I was simply being present for a child who needed to know she was loved unconditionally. The difference was subtle but profound. Before, my relationships with my family were based on what I could do for them, how useful I could be, how much I was willing to sacrifice to earn my place at their table. Now, I was discovering what it felt like to connect with people, including my granddaughter, from a place of genuine care rather than desperate need. My book club friends started inviting me to other activities: dinner parties, movie nights, day trips to museums and gardens. Dorothy, who had welcomed me so warmly that first day, became a real friend. "You know," she said one Thursday after our discussion of that month's novel, "you have such interesting insights. Have you ever thought about leading a discussion group yourself?" The idea would have terrified the old me. What if I wasn't good enough? What if people didn't like my choices? What if I failed? But the new me, the one who had stopped measuring her worth by other people's approval, found the idea exciting rather than frightening. "I think I'd like that," I told her. And I meant it. This is what happens when you stop pouring all your energy into relationships that drain you. You discover you have more to give than you ever imagined. You find people who appreciate what you offer instead of taking it for granted. You remember that you're worth more than whatever scraps others are willing to throw your way. And most importantly, you realize that the love you've been trying so desperately to earn from people who don't want it already exists. It just needs to be redirected toward people who do. It was a Saturday morning, exactly 6 weeks after the anniversary incident, when David showed up at my door. I was in my garden, wearing old jeans and a sun hat, my hands deep in the soil as I planted the herb garden I'd been planning for months. I heard his car door slam with more force than necessary and knew immediately that this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Through my kitchen window, I could see him pacing on my front porch like a caged animal, his jaw set in that stubborn line I remembered from his teenage years when he didn't get his way. But I wasn't the same woman who used to drop everything and rush to soothe his frustrations. I finished planting my basil seedlings, washed my hands thoroughly, and only then went to answer the door. The man standing on my porch looked like my son, but something fundamental had shifted in how I saw him. Instead of the boy I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, I saw a grown man who had driven 20 minutes across town to yell at his mother for having the audacity to set boundaries. "What the hell is going on, Mom?" he demanded, pushing past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation. "First you cause a scene at our anniversary, then you won't return Chloe's calls, and now Lily says you're telling her that we don't want you around anymore." I closed the door quietly and turned to face him, noting how he'd reframed every single element of our situation to cast himself as the victim. The rejected anniversary gift had become me causing a scene. My decision to stop accepting unacceptable treatment had become me not returning calls. And my honest conversation with my granddaughter had somehow become me telling her we don't want you around. "I haven't spoken to Chloe in 6 weeks, David, because she made it very clear at your anniversary party that I'm not welcome in your lives. As for Lily, I told her exactly what happened, that you and I had a disagreement, but that it didn't change how much I love her." "Mom, you're being completely unreasonable about this whole thing. It was one party. You can't just cut us off because of one misunderstanding." One misunderstanding. 6 years of systematic exclusion, financial exploitation, and emotional manipulation reduced to one misunderstanding. I looked at this man, my son, who I'd raised to be better than this, and realized he genuinely believed his own revisionist history. "David, let me be very clear about something. I am not cutting you off. I am simply respecting the boundaries you established when your wife told me I wasn't welcome at your celebration." "That's not what she meant." "That's exactly what she meant," I interrupted, my voice still unnervingly calm. "And it's exactly what you meant when you stood behind her and said nothing while she dismissed me from your doorstep." I watched his face cycle through confusion, irritation, and something that looked almost like panic as he realized his usual tactics weren't working. The mother who used to apologize for having feelings, who used to beg for scraps of his attention, who used to make herself smaller to accommodate his comfort, that woman was gone. "Mom, we never said we didn't want you in our lives." "You didn't have to say it, David. You've been showing me for years. The gradually decreased phone calls, the supervised visits with my grandchildren, the exclusion from family events, the way Chloe rewrites our family history while you sit silent. Last month was just the first time someone bothered to say it out loud." "You're being dramatic." "No, David. I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm being completely honest about what's been happening in our relationship, and the truth is that you and your wife decided long ago that I was a burden you had to manage rather than a person you wanted to celebrate. I could see him struggling to find a response that would make me the unreasonable one, the difficult one, the one who needed to apologize and beg for forgiveness. But I wasn't giving him that opening anymore. Mom, family helps family. That's how this works. You can't just stop. Stop what, David? Stop providing free childcare? Stop giving you money you never pay back? Stop cooking meals for people who treat me like hired help? Stop accepting treatment from you that I wouldn't tolerate from a stranger? It's not like that. It's exactly like that. And you know what? You're right about family helping family. But family also includes family. Family celebrates together, mourns together, makes decisions together. Family doesn't systematically erase each other from photographs and traditions and holiday tables. David tried several more approaches: guilt, minimization, blame shifting, even a few tears. He told me I was being petty, holding grudges, overreacting to something that wasn't a big deal. He accused me of turning Lily against them, of being selfish, of abandoning my responsibilities as a mother and grandmother. But I had found something during those weeks of reclaiming my life: self-respect. And self-respect, I'd learned, was not negotiable. David, I said finally, when he'd exhausted his arsenal of manipulation tactics, 6 weeks ago, you and your wife made a choice. You chose to exclude me from your celebration, your traditions, your family life. You made that choice consciously and deliberately. I've made a choice too. I choose to stop begging for acceptance from people who have already decided I'm not worth accepting. I choose to stop giving my time and energy and love to people who see it as an obligation rather than a gift. I choose to stop measuring my worth by whether or not you want me around. What does that mean? It means, I said, walking to my front door and opening it wide, that I heard you loud and clear when you told me where I stand in your life. And I'm choosing to stand somewhere else, somewhere I'm actually wanted. But Mom, it was never about the anniversary party, David. It was about the hand that held the gift and the heart that chose it. You made it very clear that neither was welcome in your life, so I'm taking them both home where they belong. David stood there for a long moment, looking like he wanted to argue more, but finally understanding that the woman who used to absorb his anger and apologize for her own hurt was never coming back. The mother who had taught him he could treat people badly and they'd still love him unconditionally had learned to love herself conditionally instead. He left without another word, and I closed the door behind him with the same calm finality I'd been denied 6 weeks earlier, but this time I was the one walking away from something that no longer served me. And for the first time in years, that felt like exactly the right thing to do. It's been 8 months since David stormed out of my house, 8 months since I stopped accepting the unacceptable, and I want to tell you what my life looks like now, because it's nothing like what I feared it would be when I first made the decision to choose myself. I'm sitting in my garden room right now, surrounded by the herb garden I planted the day David came to yell at me for having boundaries. The basil I was planting during his tantrum is now flourishing, along with rosemary, thyme, and the lavender that fills my house with the most incredible fragrance. These plants don't ask for anything I'm not willing to give, and they reward my care with beauty and abundance. My Thursdays are still reserved for book club, but now I'm leading the discussion twice a month. Dorothy was right. I do have insights worth sharing, ideas worth exploring, a perspective that comes from 7 decades of living and, finally, learning to value my own experience. Last month, we read Educated by Tara Westover, and our discussion about family loyalty versus self-preservation was so intense that we ran an hour over our usual time. I've become what the younger women in our group call goals, the kind of older woman they hope to be someday: independent, thoughtful, unafraid to speak her mind, comfortable in her own skin. They ask me for advice about dealing with difficult family members, setting boundaries with adult children, finding purpose after retirement. I've become a resource instead of a burden, a teacher instead of a supplicant. Lily calls me every other Tuesday now, always when her parents are busy with work or distracted by their own drama. Our conversations have become the highlight of my week, not because I'm using them to get information about David and Chloe, but because my granddaughter has become a real person to me, instead of just a pawn in someone else's game. She's 13 now, navigating middle school with all its complexities, and she tells me things she doesn't tell her parents. Not secrets exactly, but feelings, fears, dreams she's not ready to share with people who might judge or try to fix them. I listen without offering unsolicited advice, validate her experiences without trying to solve her problems, love her without expecting anything in return. Last month, she asked me something that stopped me cold. "Grandma, how do you know when someone really loves you?" And I realized that for the first time in my life, I actually knew the answer to that question, not from a book or a movie or wishful thinking, but from lived experience. Real love, I told her, doesn't make you smaller. It doesn't ask you to apologize for taking up space or having needs or wanting to be celebrated. Real love doesn't make you perform or audition or prove your worth over and over again. Real love shows up consistently, not just when it's convenient. It includes you in the good times and supports you through the bad times. It sees your efforts and appreciates your sacrifices and never takes your presence for granted. And most importantly, sweetheart, real love never makes you feel like you have to earn it. Love that has to be earned isn't love at all. It's employment. I could hear her thinking about that on the other end of the phone, processing it in the way that only teenagers can. Completely and without the filter of adult politeness or social expectation. David and Chloe still live across town. They still have their beautiful house, their successful careers, their carefully curated social media presence. They still need help with household projects and childcare and all the logistics of adult life. But they've had to find other people to provide those services, because I meant what I said that day in my living room. I'm not angry anymore. Anger was just the bridge I had to cross to get to something better. Self-respect. I don't wish them ill. I simply wish them nothing at all, because they've made it clear that nothing is what they want from me. You know what I've learned in these 8 months? The energy I was spending trying to earn love from people who didn't want to give it was enormous. I had no idea how much of my life force was being drained by the constant anxiety of wondering if I was enough, doing enough, giving enough to deserve basic kindness and inclusion. Now that energy goes toward people who appreciate what I have to offer. My book club friends who value my insights, my gardening classmates who benefit from my research and enthusiasm, the literacy program volunteers who appreciate my patience with struggling readers, Lily who treasures our honest conversations and genuine connection. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you're the one always giving, always accommodating, always making excuses for people who treat your love like an inconvenience, let this be your sign. You don't have to keep standing on doorsteps holding gifts for people who see you as a burden. You don't have to keep offering your heart to people who hand it back unwrapped. You don't have to keep explaining why you deserve basic kindness and inclusion from the people who claim to love you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is to stop. Stop trying to earn what should be freely given. Stop accepting crumbs when you deserve the whole feast. Stop making yourself smaller so other people can feel bigger. Take that love, that care, that incredible capacity for nurturing and devotion, and bring it home to yourself. Find people who celebrate your gifts instead of taking them for granted. Discover what it feels like to be valued instead of tolerated, appreciated instead of managed, included instead of endured. This is what the other side looks like. It's not bitter or lonely or sad, even though that's what I was afraid it would be. It's peaceful and purposeful and full of genuine connection with people who actually want what you have to offer. It's Tuesday phone calls with a granddaughter who trusts you with her real thoughts. It's Thursday afternoons discussing literature with friends who hang on your every word. It's Saturday mornings in a garden you planted for your own pleasure, surrounded by beauty you created for yourself. Most of all, it's the deep satisfaction of knowing that you're worth celebrating, even if, especially if, you have to be the one to light the candles. I'm 73 years old and I'm just now learning to throw my own party, but it turns out I'm very good at celebrations when they're for someone who actually wants to be there, me. If you enjoyed this story about finding the courage to value yourself as much as you value others, please subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. There are so many of us learning to light our own candles, and we need to know we're not alone in choosing ourselves for once. The garden is calling, and for the first time in my life, so am I.